I think I finally figured out my list of my top 10 favorite films of 2024. I'm only considering movies that were released in the United States this year, which is part of the reason why it took me so long to figure out my list in the first place, because Black Dog would have been in my top 3, but that technically hasn't had a proper US release date yet, so I guess that's my favorite film of 2025. This goes without saying, but this is a list of my personal favorites of the year, not the movies I consider to be the best of the year. I think Sing Sing is without question one of the best movies of the year, but it isn't on my list because it wasn't one of my top 10 favorites. Some people might consider it blasphemy to have this movie so low on my list, but my number 10 is Dune Part 2. This one was on my list as soon as I saw it, and then it gradually fell off my list, but after a rewatch, it worked its way back in. It truly feels like everyone was firing on all cylinders when they made this movie. I know everyone was calling The Brutalist a monumental achievement, but I genuinely believe Dune Part 2 is a monumental achievement. I remember people who saw it earlier than I did were comparing it to Empire Strikes Back, and I thought they were just being hyperbolic, but honestly, it fits. We rarely get sci-fi epics like this anymore, and you can feel how passionate Denis Villeneuve is about Frank Herbert's novels. Everything in the first film feels like it was paving the way for this one. Number 9 is Hundreds of Beavers. Technically, it's listed as a 2022 film, but it didn't receive a proper release in the United States until this year, so it's on my list. I feel like no one is making slapstick comedies anymore, and Charlie Chaplin is my favorite filmmaker, so obviously I was going to love a modern slapstick comedy. Honestly, when I think of the best visual effects of the year, this is one of the first movies I think of, and to achieve that with such a small budget is incredible. Beaver costumes are expensive too. I don't know how they pulled this movie off with that budget. It feels like a live action version of Looney Tunes while simultaneously feeling so fresh and unique, and it's fun. It feels like a lot of new movies this year were really heavy or sad, so we need more fun movies. Speaking of heavy movies, number 8 is Ghostlight. This is how you know this is a list of my personal favorites and not movies I consider to be the best, because I thought Sing Sing was the better movie about art as a therapeutic process, but Ghostlight hit me a lot harder. I think what helps is the movie managed to hold my attention because they don't explicitly tell you what this family has experienced. There are just some subtle clues scattered throughout, so I was trying to piece things together and understand what they were going through. And I didn't even know until after the movie was over that the family in the film is a family in real life. It's such a poignant film, but it filled me with a feeling of hope, and that's something I needed this year. My number 7 is Anora. I think Sean Baker keeps getting better and better as a filmmaker from a technical standpoint, even though this isn't my favorite in his filmography. I was in awe of Mikey Madison's performance. Watching her in interviews, she seems shy and soft-spoken, and I never would have guessed because she tends to play such loud characters. And there's a lot of nuance in her performance that tells us more about who Anora is in such a subtle way. The more I think about it, the more I realize it's a devastating film disguised as a delightful one, and I love that. I'm a sucker for things that seem happy but are actually sad. The way people talk about The Brutalist being about the American dream is how I felt about Anora, because for working class people, the American dream is always just out of reach. Even if you think you finally made it, it can all be taken away from you in an instant, and that's something that hit a little too close to home for me, especially this year. Even though I'm nothing like the titular character in this film, I found her relatable, especially in her more vulnerable moments. My number 6 is Thelma. I almost took this one off the list, but then I thought about it more and I kept moving it up higher and higher. I think it's brilliant. The fact that Josh Margolin wrote, directed, and edited his debut feature is impressive, but the screenplay. First of all, the idea to basically make Mission Impossible but with June Squibb instead of Tom Cruise, amazing. I, for one, think we should remake every Tom Cruise movie and cast June Squibb as the lead. Plus, the fact that Josh Margolin was inspired by someone trying to scam his grandmother and turned that seemingly insignificant real-life scenario into the plot for a film. I love that kind of creativity. June Squibb is a national treasure, and I can't believe it took so long for her to land a leading role. Thelma is hilarious and entertaining, but it also offers a heartfelt reflection on aging. It made me smile, laugh, and cry. I just love it so much. Coming in at number 5 is Hitman. I'm still bitter that everyone saw that other Glenn Powell rom-com in theaters because I thought Hitman was a lot better, and I think Glenn Powell's performance in this movie is his best by far. It's a romantic comedy that's actually funny, sexy, and unpredictable. I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but I think this is top tier Richard Linklater. Not only is it a fun romantic comedy, it's also a lot more philosophical than I expected. Speaking of movies that were more philosophical than I anticipated, my number 4 is A Different Man. It's one of the best movies I've seen about identity in years. It has so much to say about self-image, self-worth, and the way we project our insecurities onto others, and it poses some fascinating questions about representation in art. It's such a profound look at how we become so preoccupied with how others perceive us, and it's hilarious in such a delightfully dark way. I think it's one of the most intelligent, thought-provoking films of the year. My number 3 is Memoir of a Snail. If you've watched any of my Movies That Changed My Life videos, you probably could have guessed this one would mean a lot to me. Like Like Adam Elliott's previous work, it's funny but also gut-wrenching. There was at least one moment in this that made my jaw drop and made me cry at the same time. It's definitely one of the saddest films of the year, but it's so rewarding. Speaking of my movies that changed my life videos, I made one of those about this next film, and this is another one that made my jaw drop and made me cry simultaneously, and that's Look Back. Since I already made a long video about this one, I won't go into too much detail. I just think it's a masterpiece, and despite having moments that took me by surprise, it somehow gets better on a rewatch. There are so many beautiful details that you'll notice if you watch it again. I think 2024 was one of the best years for animated films, and this one is easily my favorite. Do I even need to say what my number one of the year is? It's not like I made 10 videos about it or anything, and I totally didn't make it my entire personality.